Hello and welcome to yet another virtual event here with Tattered Cover Bookstore. For those of you who don't know, we are an independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado, though we serve all over the place. So if you need books for anything other than getting a venture ready, you can get it at tatteredcover.com. If you need or want closed captioning, there is a button at the bottom of your YouTube screen that says CC. Go ahead and click that. You'll have closed captioning for tonight's events. If you have any questions for tonight's guest, please put them in the YouTube chat and we will get them to everybody. Again, tonight's event is Adventure Ready with Katie Gerber and Heather Anderson. But first, I am going to introduce someone from She Jumps, our amazing co-sponsor for tonight. Please welcome Lindsay Wyckoff.
Thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for joining us and welcome to a celebratory discussion of Adventure Ready, a hiker's guide to planning, training, and resiliency, written by renowned long-distance hikers Katie Gerber and Heather Anderson. We are obviously here today with Tattered Cover Bookstore and also with She Jumps. I just would love to briefly tell you a little bit about She Jumps. We removed barriers for women and girls in the outdoors through belonging. A sense of belonging is something that you just can't fake. And that welcoming, secure feeling is one that inspires us every day. We live to create that feeling for women and girls who are experiencing the outdoors. You might wonder why this matters, but it's because we all belong outside. There is space for all of us. And at She Jumps, we are just so proud to continue our mission of getting girls and women outside. And over the last 3 years, we've actually grown year by year at 30% of our events. So that means every year we're getting more girls and women to participate in both in-person and virtual events where they're learning more about outdoor activities, regardless of their experience level. We just want to be able to bring women and girls together so they can experience nature, but also connect with one another. We at She Jumps inspire women and girls to jump, to push themselves past their perceived limitations and take risks that will result in growth, confidence, and a connection to nature and joy. In partnership with nature, through outdoor activities, sports, and education, we reduce the barriers to growth and transformation for women and girls. If you're interested in learning more about our programs, events, volunteer opportunities, just all of the fun things we have going on, please visit shejumps.org and follow us on social media at She Jumps. The perfect transition into tonight's discussion. The three women that I'm about to introduce you to embody everything that we feel like our mission is really driving towards. I'd first like to introduce you to our two authors. First, Katie Gerber. Katie is a certified holistic health and nutrition coach, wilderness instructor, guide, and writer. She's a seasoned long-distance hiker who has logged thousands of miles on trails and routes, including the CDT, the PCT, the Colorado Trail, and the Oregon Desert Trail. She lives and adventures in the mountains of Colorado. Our second member of the Adventure Ready Dream Team is Heather Anderson. She is a National Geographic Adventurer of the Year. She became the first woman to complete a calendar year Triple Crown, hiking the AT, PCT, and CDT in 2018, which is incredible. She holds the fastest known times on the PCT, the AT, and the Arizona Trail. She is also the author of Thirst and Mud, Rocks, Blazes. Heather divides her time between the East and the mountains of the West. Lastly, our amazing moderator for tonight, and I have to admit, reading these three bios, I was just blown away. Liz Thomas is going to lead our discussion tonight. She is a professional hiker, speaker, and outdoor writer who held the women's self-supported speed record on the Appalachian Trail from 2011 to 2015. She is a former staff writer for the New York Times and the current editor-in-chief for the outdoor web magazine Treeline Review. She also works for Backpacker Magazine as a contributing editor and a columnist of Ask a Thru Hiker. Liz has talked about hiking and gear on a national stage, including appearances on Good Morning America and the Washington Post. It is an absolute honor to be here with the three of you. And Liz, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you, Heather and Katie, for writing this amazing book. I was really, really impressed, as As you can imagine, I read a lot of hiking books, and there was such good material in here that I'd never seen published anywhere before. So I'm really excited to get into it. And also a big thanks to Tattered Cover. As a former Denverite, I'm a very big fan of this independent bookstore in particular. So it's when they asked me to be part of this event, I said, yes, I love Tattered Cover. And also Heather and Katie. So my first question is actually for both of you. This book covers an enormous breadth of topics associated with long distance hiking and backpacking. I'd love to hear a little bit about your inspiration for writing the book and why you felt it was important that this information is available to future and also current distance hikers. As someone who has been hiking for a long time, I learned a ton. I guess
I'll jump in first. Yeah, I mean, I think like at an initial level, like being outside has been one of those meaningful and transformational experiences in my own life. And so getting a chance to share some of the knowledge that I've gained over the past few decades with others to help them get outside more confidently and safely was, a huge initial motivator. And then I know both Heather and I wanted to really cover, provide a full guidebook, like a full experience of what a hiker might expect and how to prepare themselves successfully before, during, and after the trail. And I think we both felt that we had unique experiences to share with like nutrition and physical training and the mental preparation, and then that reintegration aspect that really like set our guidebook apart from others. So I would say that's a lot of my motivation.
Yeah, similar to Katie, I really just wanted to make sure that this guidebook covered everything. Like you said, there's an enormous breadth to it. Like my first long distance through hike was almost 20 years ago. It was 19 years ago. Last month, I would have started my Appalachian Trail hike at the age of 21. And I knew absolutely nothing about what I was about ready to do, except that I was going to walk 2,200 miles almost. I didn't even know how to pronounce Mount Katahdin. I was pronouncing it like the water filter company, Katahdin, and basically knew nothing. And I had gone to my library and looked for books, and everything was old and external frame packs and cut off jeans. And there definitely weren't pictures of women solo hiking. And, there just wasn't a lot of information. So everything I had to learn while I was out there from other people. And, here I am, 19 years later, I've hiked 45,000 plus miles. I basically spent all of my life outdoors. And so I realized at this point, like, I have a lot of information to share, and I want to make it available so that there are other people out there like me who want to do these things. They want to get outdoors and they can't find the information they want. I want it to be available to them.
That's amazing. Thank you both for sharing that personal experience. This is another question for both of you. One of the things that I really loved about this book is how nutrition plays such an important role. And as a thru hiker myself, who was always looking to optimize and refresh my nutrition, that's something I really appreciated learning more about. And you each have gone through a journey to find out how food impacts your success and how you feel day to day on trail, and actually after the trail as well. Can you each please share how you learned, in some cases the hard way, what works and what doesn't work, and some of the steps you're taking now to make nutrition easier for you? I guess Katie can go first.
Yeah, Katie,
I'll jump in.
You're the
Sure.
expert on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I sort of like stumbled into it on my first hike on the AT in 2009. I had no clue what to eat, and there was a lot less information available about hikers' diets in general, and especially how to eat well on trail. I mean, I knew from growing up as a cross-country runner and a swimmer that, what I ate correlated pretty well to how I performed and how I felt. But putting in that together with backpacking and how to find foods that fit on trail, it was too much for me, and especially planning for my long distance hike. So on that first hike, I ended up carrying a lot of like the typical hiker fare, like ramen and Pop-Tarts and Snickers and things like that. And I never really felt that great physically. And I never felt really great about like the food purchases that I was making. And then when I was on the PCT, I was a vegetarian at that time, and I had figured out how to eat a little bit healthier, but I still ended up feeling pretty exhausted by the end of it because I don't think I was getting enough protein to repair my muscles adequately. And so, yeah, I figured out a little bit more, but still felt like there's still ways to go. And like you were just saying, Liz, like I'm always looking for ways to optimize my nutrition, because at that point I was realizing even more like, okay, this really does make a big difference, especially over multiple months, on how well I'm going to feel and perform, and even on like mental clarity and things like that, all of which, enhance your hike. And so then by the time I got to the CDT, 10 years after I had done that first long hike, I had gone through some health issues at home, done an elimination diet which is just a protocol to figure out like what foods work for your body and which ones don't. And I went to great lengths to make sure that I had the food that I needed, that I did the research that I needed to do ahead of time to figure out like, where do I need to mail resupply boxes, and what types of foods make me feel best, and would purchase in bulk and make my own meals at home. So yeah, I went to, great lengths to figure out like what is going to make me feel my best. And it was worth it to me to spend that time researching and purchasing food and putting it together at home and sending out all those boxes. Even though it did add to like the trail prep time, it was completely worth it to me to know that I was going to have the foods that made me feel my best on trail. So yeah, I would say like that's the biggest thing that I do in terms of nutrition now, because everyone has different dietary needs, but it's about knowing what works for you and then making sure that you like set yourself up for success, whether that's researching the trail in ahead of time. Like on the Oregon Desert Trail, I sent, there's very little available there. So I sent a lot of resupply boxes on that trail just to make sure I had what I need. So yeah, I think it's about knowing yourself and doing the research to just set yourself up to feel great on trail.
Yeah, similarly, I didn't know what to be eating when I started out hiking either. I didn't actually grow up doing anything athletic. So it wasn't like I had great eating habits to begin with. I didn't have any correlation between like what I ate and how I performed. I also didn't have a lot of money on my first through hike. So I mostly ate things I found in hiker boxes, which are free exchange boxes along the trail. So lots of mystery powders and baggies of stuff. And then, things like Pop-Tarts and M&Ms, like really peanut butter. I ate a lot of peanut butter. Just these things that were inexpensive and highly caloric, because that was all I felt like I needed was calories. And I ended up getting really malnourished on that hike, to the point where nearing the end of that hike, my hair was coming out in clumps, and I had a tooth break. So just extremely undernourishing my body. And so by the time I went to my next couple of trails, I had somewhat improved my diet, but I still ate a lot of cookies and candy and things like that. I started mixing in actual like dried fruit, and I had a little bit more money, so there was like actual like meal planning. But it wasn't really until after I had set my PCT FKT in 2013, in which I was very, very sick and emaciated after I finished it, that I really started to pay attention to nutrition, because putting myself through something that was really intense and difficult really demonstrated to me that my body would really suffer if I was asking a lot of it without giving it what it needed. And I was able to diagnose an underlying health condition, and then also build my nutritional strategy around eating whole foods and nutritious foods, things that weren't just calorically dense, but also nutritionally dense. And that's the strategy I employed 2 years later when I set my Appalachian Trail FKT. And despite demanding so much of my body, I felt healthier than I ever had on a thru hike before, simply because of what I was eating and how I was taking care of myself. And so I've continued to try to eat better and better, and see how different foods affect me both on and off the trail in my training and in my recovery, to build off of that, and constantly just tweaking and improving my nutrition.
Thank you, Heather. That was something I really appreciated about the book, is all of the tips that both of you have for reiterative learning, and trying new things out on yourself, and journaling about it, and really trying to think about how small changes can have a big impact on our overall health and fitness. So this is a question for Katie. Your chapter, actually this goes right along with what we were just talking about, your chapter on creating a resilient body really stuck with me, because I hadn't really thought that hard about inflammation, gut health, and most of all, managing stress and its impact on physical performance. And I know these three are really big topics that take up almost an entire chapter, but can you address a few key takeaways that you wish more hikers knew about inflammation, gut health, and stress, and how the typical hiker style lifestyle can impact that, and what we as hikers can do about it?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. This does go, especially with right along with what Heather was just sharing about like the rigors of long distance hiking. And while most of us aren't going out for FKTs like the both of you have, it's still, no matter who, any backpacker is going to experience a lot of wear and tear on the body. You know, hiking 10, 12, 14 hours a day, it's very demanding on the body. And hikers are going hours upon hours and day after day with very little recovery time. I think something a lot of people don't think about is like that level of exercise can cause some inflammation in the body. And so when that inflammation is chronic and it's building up and it's unmanaged over time, that's when we start seeing some of those issues like joint aches and stiffness and digestive issues and like really low energy and slow recovery times that we just think are completely normal. But like Heather was just sharing, when we're doing things to combat the inflammation in our body, whether we know we're doing that or not, like through a good diet, for example, it can really make a big difference in how you feel from day to day. So some of the things that can sort of like fan those flames of inflammation are things like poor sleep, or like you were just saying, like chronic stress. And that can be like we're talking about physical stress, like exercise, or like mental, emotional stress, like I might not finish my hike because of finances or things like that. And then again, like highly processed diets or like really nutrient poor diets, things that disrupt your gut microbiome, those can all sort of add to inflammation that's already occurring in the body on a long distance hike. And all of those things obviously are going to happen on a long hike. But I think the key is like being conscious of sort of the bigger picture of what's going on. Of like, oh, I've already got this level of inflammation that's going on in the body from the heavy exercise. And do I want to add to it with a poor diet, with chronic sleep deprivation, with not managing my stress? So yeah, some of those things that we can think about as hikers that we can boost, do to boost our bodies and help us to have better energy and less stiffness and faster recovery are a whole foods, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant rich diet, which is going to support a healthy microbiome. So like having adequate fiber in the diet is going to help with the healthy microbiome. Trying as well as you can to get good sleep on trail, whether that means not looking at your devices before you go to bed, because that blue light, can disrupt your melatonin levels, which can help you not sleep as well. Or even, some of the strategies that we share later in the book, like meditation and things that can actually help you manage your stress, or journaling out your anxieties or things like that. So those are some of the actual takeaways that we can do before the trail or on the trail to actually help our bodies physically perform better throughout the whole trail.
Thank you so much, Katie. This next question is for Heather. Your chapter on physical preparation made me think, because you challenge a lot of common misconceptions about people have about training. And first, I really appreciated the focus on rest and pacing. I also loved how you talk about the goal of a training program should be to make easier the things that are currently your hardest tasks, which I thought was a really great way to think about training for a thru hike. You've worked as a full-time physical trainer and coach before. What are some common mistakes you see in training people who are going out on a thru hike? And what tips do you have that really work to help people succeed at their training goals?
Yeah, the most common issues I see are what I tried to address in the book. Mainly, most people try to do too much in their training, whether they're training for a hike or a race or whatever. Most people try to go too hard, too fast. And then they either get injured or they get burnt out, or they just don't stick with it. And so it's a really easy trap to fall into. But I think what most people don't understand is that our bodies are capable of huge adaptations, but they're not instant. We're not machines. We don't have a switch. It takes time. And the cycling of rest and load is extremely important. And that's why if you start out on a long distance trail, those first few days, like you'll get to the end of the day, maybe you walked 12 miles and you just feel like you got run over by a truck. And maybe a week after that, you've done a 20-mile day and you feel fine. And it's not because all of a sudden something magical happened. What happened is your body progressively adapted to the load that you were placing on it. And so during training, what you want to do is you want to do progressive overloading, but give yourself adequate rest. And so usually what I do in my own personal life is I cycle through and I do about a 3-week build. So I'm progressively overloading for 3 weeks. And then I take a rest week where I just either like dial it all the way back to where I was at the beginning, or I just step it back about half. I just take a big week to rest and eat well and nourish my body so that it can make those changes and adaptations. And so that's really key to any sort of training, especially for the trail. And it's key for when you get on the trail too, like trying to go out and do a 20-mile a day, your first day on the trail, and then like, push yourself is going to probably lead to getting an injury. On my first Pacific Crest Trail hike, by the time I got 400 miles into the hike, I had Achilles tendonitis because I had hit the trail doing 20 plus miles a day, because 2 years before I had hiked the Appalachian Trail. So obviously I could just do 20s right off the bat. And the trail wasn't that hard. And so physically I was able to do it, but then I ended up with an injury and had to take several days off. So despite what you're capable of prior, and that's a mental trap I fall into. Like, I have run 100 miles before. So like part of me thinks that I could just go out and run 100 miles tomorrow, which I know I completely cannot do. You have to give your body time to adapt. And then there was a second part to your question. What was the second part?
Yeah. What tips do you have that really work to help people's training goals? So I think you touched on that, but if there's anything else you want to add, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing, I guess it was about the tasks that you're currently hard. I think a lot of us, especially when we're training for a long distance hike, we think that we need to do hiking or running, train those muscles. And the reality is our daily lives are all very forward motion. And so training the complementary muscles, especially if you have a desk job. So the things on the back of your body and the sides of your body, these complementary things that are going to help hold you in place and help you propel forward when you're on the trail are really crucial to train. And that's usually what I work with most of my clients on. Most of my clients don't have a problem going forward. That's like what they like to do. It's keeping yourself healthy while going forward that needs to be worked on.
That's really well said. So this is a question for both of you. My favorite chapter of the book is on mental preparation, because I know that's something that is very important in my own personal hiking life and a big focus of the book that I wrote about hiking. You mentioned 6 ideas that, frankly, I have never seen stated so explicitly in a hiking book before. And I really, really appreciate it. And I think it can help a lot of people. And those were visualizations, mantras, affirmations, meditations, journaling, and voluntary hardship. I'll let you two decide between the two of you how you want to split up these topics, but I'd love to hear a story from each of you about how these strategies have helped you personally become a more resilient hiker before, during, and after your hikes.
Sure. I'll jump in first. I would say the three that really stand out to me. I use all the techniques, but I would say visualization, journaling, and voluntary hardship are 3 of my favorites that I rely upon quite a bit. With visualization, it's such a great, scientifically studied and proven technique for enhancing performance that I practice visualization each morning, whether I'm on trail or off, and especially when I have something challenging ahead. So the last hike I can think of doing this for, a lot of visualization beforehand, was this Great Basin route that I did last spring, where I knew I was going to push myself to my edge and I was going to be doing a ton of route finding. There was going to be a lot of elevation gain and loss. It was going to be hot temperatures, long dry stretches, just a lot of different challenges coming at me at once. And I was like, am I going to be able to hold up to this? How am I going to do? And something that, we're talking about, that you can do to prepare yourself, in which I practiced at that time ahead of the trail, was really visualizing myself in vivid detail, which is a key to it, feeling really hot and tired, and having these long water carries and heavy backpack that was weighing on my body, and choosing to move forward anyways in those moments. And I also did some journaling before that hike and writing out a lot of the fears that I was having, what if I get injured, and what if I'm lonely, or what if I get lost? All the things that I think most backpackers or hikers, come, these fears that come up at some point in their hiking careers. And I would journal those things out. And for me, journaling helps me to get some distance between myself and the thought. And it helps me to see it a little bit more clearly and to dissect, is that a rational fear that I'm having? And what would I do about it if that thing did happen? And it helps me realize usually that with a lot of the fears that I'm having, that I, in most cases, am going to be fine. I can get resourceful, I can figure my way out through it, and that I don't need to just let it swirl around in my head and give me this anxiety and stress me out about the hike. So yeah, I'll use journaling in that way to get out a lot of anxieties. I think it's a great tool for that. As well as for goal setting, but I use it a lot for fears and anxieties before an event is happening. And then with the voluntary hardship, I think a lot of us are doing this a lot of times and we don't realize that we're doing it. So essentially it's just practicing doing challenging things in advance of the actual challenging thing that you're preparing for, so you can build that self-concept of somebody who does hard things. And so for me, one of the first memories I have of like intentionally leaning into discomfort was going on training runs when I was in junior high cross country, like out in the rain and the snow and the humidity, doing like twice a days and, sweltering Ohio August afternoons. And I used to dread going out on these runs because I thought it was just going to be so awful. And then I would get out there and I would be like, oh, that wasn't actually that bad. And realizing that sort of became this like mental superpower of like, oh, I can do these tough things. And actually they're kind of fun to do some of these tough things. And it just helped me evolve this self-concept of I'm capable of doing hard things. And that has served me, I would say, on every single hike I've ever done, because there will inevitably be challenges and hard things to go through. And you're going to wake up and it's going to be raining on your tent. Or last week when I was guiding some trips in the sand dunes, you will wake up with a foot of snow on your tent. And to have that like mental strength to want to still like get up and move forward and know that you're going to be fine doing that just has been really powerful for me. So those are some of the techniques that I've relied upon.
Similar to Katie, those 3 techniques are actually my favorites as well. And I actually have evolved my mental strategy to use some of these other techniques based on my previous experiences. Visualization was really key to my first success. It was the first time I used a mental technique, a mental strategy, even though I didn't know I was using one at the time. And it was just because preparing for that very first Appalachian Trail hike, I had read that it rains a lot on the AT. And so I just pictured myself hiking in the rain for 6 months and always smiling and always being happy. And of course, it didn't actually rain for 6 months straight. But, when I got out there, like, even though the Appalachian Trail was just so much harder than I ever thought it could be, or ever would have even imagined it could be, I never remember having a bad day because I had, done this thing where I had visualized myself being joyful, even though it was hard. And so these techniques really helped me. And as I've grown as a hiker, especially like once I started pushing myself into like the FKT realm, I started developing additional strategies. And one of those was mantras. And like Katie said, like this voluntary hardship taught her she could do hard things. And that's one of my go-to mantras really on the trail. Like when I'm having a rough time, I remind myself, you can do hard things. You have done really hard things. And if I have to tell myself that like 100 times in one day to get myself through the day, fine. But like I will repeat that or whatever the appropriate mantra is to myself. And there's a lot of power in like giving yourself that mini pep talk, especially when it's rooted in some of these other techniques and experiences you've had. And I also use meditation now, which I never used to do. But I definitely use it more of, rather than the sitting cross-legged and like zenning out like most people think of meditation, hiking really became my meditation. And I didn't even really know that this was happening over my many years of hiking. It never was an intentional thing. But as I began to develop a personal meditational strategy off the trail, I began to see how hiking was a meditative practice for me. I hike solo most of the time. And so I'm very present and aware while I am hiking and focusing on the moment and what I am doing. And that gives me this deep connection to the experience, but also all of that beneficial mental health that comes from meditating. And it made it easier for me to actually create an off-trail sitting down meditation practice, which I was never able to do prior because I'm just too active. So over time, that actually grew out of that. And so that comes into handy both prior to and returning home from a trip to help continue that meditative practice that I have while walking.
Thank you so much, Heather. That really resonated with me. Well, we have just 2 minutes left, and I did want to ask you a little bit, ask you both about your last chapter on reintegration, which I thought was a really important chapter, and I appreciate that you focus on it because I know it's something that a lot of thru hikers struggle with after they get back from their trip. And it's actually one of the things that I would, if I ever get a chance to amend my book, I would love to add a reintegration chapter. Mm-hmm. How was reintegration for both of you? And in your opinion, what are the underlying reasons for the challenges of reintegration? And can you share a few tips from the book that helped?
Sure. Yeah. So after every hike, I've had some period where I've struggled a little bit coming back, even though I know that it's coming. This period, and it's gotten easier with each hike because I have known that it's coming, and now I have developed some more strategies. But yeah, I think it's, part of it is just like biological, physiological, changing levels of hormones and neurotransmitters, going from spending so much time exercising to then often being sedentary and in front of a screen. We're not as in tune with our circadian rhythm when we're indoors. So we're not having that natural light cycle where we're up with the sun and going to bed when the sun goes to bed, which is all keeping our bodies regulated in ways that, we don't think about on a regular basis. So I think those are some of the things that contribute. And then a few things that have helped for me personally. First and foremost, being patient with myself and not trying to rush myself through any sort of process, and giving myself space to just feel the feelings, because a lot of times leaving the trail, and as Heather shares about in the book, it's a form of grief. It's a loss that you're processing. And so allowing myself space to process that and to understand that's a natural season that I should be going through. It's normal, it's expected, and really having gratitude for the experience. And then, of course, as we share in the book, there's some physical things that you can do as well, like eating, a whole foods diet where you're really nourishing your body and that microbiome that we talked about. 90% of your serotonin is produced in your digestive tract, so taking care of that digestive tract. And having a plan for when you come home, I think really helps as well. So you're not just trying to figure it out. It's like, okay, I know where my income's coming from. I know where I'm going to be sleeping. Kind of some of those things already, that structure in place to step into when you get off the trail has really helped me.
Yeah, the transition from being on trail to off trail is very abrupt. And I think that there's not a lot of other times in our lives that we are mono focused on a tremendous goal that is all encompassing, usually for months, that just ends. And then we're done. We've completed it. And unlike maybe like a job promotion or something like that, there is no follow up to it. And, there's this huge component that's biological, like Katie says, but there's also just this cessation of your life purpose because you have adopted this as your purpose. I must get to the end of this trail. And so, like Katie said, having this plan for when you come home, whether that's jumping into another, planning for another hike, which is how I got through many years, I'd just start planning the next adventure because it was the only thing I could do to get me out of that funk. Or at least having a plan for where you're going to live and what you're going to do, where you want to work, all of these things. Having a plan is really helpful. And beyond that, like Katie was talking about, I talk a lot about how this is like a grief process. And, for many years to me, I thought that all I was grieving was the loss of the experience on the trail. And over time, what I began to understand is I wasn't just grieving the loss of the experience. I was grieving the loss of who I was on the trail, because I think a lot of people live their lives kind of pretending to be something they're not, at least to a certain level, or fitting into a box, or following steps or following a path that they feel like they need to do. And going out onto the trail and all of a sudden there is no one there who knows who you are. They don't know what boxes you're supposed to fit into, and you don't have to fit into any box except this box that's going along the trail. And for the first time in my life, especially when I got onto the trail, I could really be me wholly and completely and not receive judgment for that. And so coming home from the trail, often I realized what I had been grieving the most was that person that I had been on the trail, that taste of freedom to be myself. And so although I still go through the biochemical readaptation process, over the last few years, once I made this realization and began making changes in my life to make my off-trail life be as similar to my on-trail life and living authentically to myself, regardless of whether I was on trail or off, all of this issue with that reintegration really began to fade away. And it was really amazing how it went from being this traumatic, months-long slog through depression to being a few weeks while my body readjusted the endocrine and, hormonal systems. Because I was staying true to myself, I was still that person that I was on the trail, and I could grieve the experience, the loss of that, but hold joy for it, like Katie was saying. So really learning to balance that and to make my life my own was the key. And really through hiking is what taught me how to make my life my own and live true to myself. So it was a very wonderful, synchronistic mutual experience.
That was a really beautiful, inspiring explanation of that. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks. Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, now we have the exciting part where we have some questions from the audience. So, for the first question, this one comes from Mary. Which of your hiking trips has meant the most to each of you?
I can start that one. The one that's meant the most to me was definitely my 2015 Appalachian Trail FKT. And it's for a lot of the reasons I was just talking about, because that was the trail experience where once and for all, I really learned to accept myself for who I was, to love myself for who I was, and to not be afraid anymore to live authentically to myself once I went, on and off the trail. And so it had been an ongoing process, but that was the final trail experience that really broke down the last of the barriers to really living an authentic, true to myself life. So that was my favorite trail experience.
That's a good one. I love that. Man, there's something I cherish about every single one of my hikes. So I think that's a hard question, but the first thing that came to mind is probably my most recent long hike, the Great Basin route that I did, because it brought together so many different skill sets that I had been building up over the years, and also pushed me to my edges the most mentally. And so I really had to dig deep and utilize all of these things that we talk about in the book, knowing my why, and really thinking about like what it meant to me to be out there and growing a lot as a hiker and a backpacker and an outdoors woman. So I just felt like I gained so much from that hike when I was over. I was like, man, that was tough. And I'm so glad that I did it.
That's so great. Thank you both for sharing that. The next question is from John. Do you have any suggestions to help if your significant other isn't interested in hiking, but you'd like to start going together?
Well, my significant other he enjoys being outdoors, but he's not a backpacker. So I can share on this. And what has worked for us is me communicating about what I want to do and why it matters to me, keeping him involved in the process and what to expect and all of that, like planning and, asking him about his concerns of me going away for months at a time and things like that, and really like working together on that. And as far as like tips for wanting to go together, I think so for me and my partner, he has expressed interest, and I think it's me waiting for him to express the interest and not ever trying to push anything onto him or tell him, I want you to go with me, you have to go with me, or anything like that. It's just I wait till he comes to me and it's like, hey, I want to do this. And then I have a lot of the planning resources and the gear and all of that. So I can take it from there and be like, okay, well, let's plan this together. Let's, get you suited up with a backpack and all of that. And so, working together once he's expressed that interest.
Yeah, communication and patience, just like Katie was saying. That's key to your relationship on every level.
Those were great answers. And speaking personally, the wait for them to come to you wanting to go on a hike has been very successful for me. From Carrie, how have you dealt with circumstances or instances you weren't prepared for?
That's been a really big learning process for me, because I am a spreadsheet queen who always likes to be in control. Like, I am afraid of flying simply because somebody else is flying the plane. I just like to be in charge, and I like to know what's happening and what's coming. And the trail is a wonderful place to learn to relinquish that control and become more balanced. And that is really something that I have learned over the years, is acceptance, because no matter how detailed you are, no matter how much you attempt to control all of the variables, stuff is going to happen that it did not go according to plan. Sometimes it's minor and sometimes it's really major. And this is kind of the tip that I give every hiker or potential through hiker that asks me, like, what's your piece of advice? It's be flexible. Like, the more flexible you can be, both like physically and mentally and emotionally, like, and schedule wise, the more successful you're going to be, because it's all about, rolling with the things that happen to you on the trail, learning to accept, well, that didn't go well, and not like wasting time, like trying to force it to go the way you want it, or even wasting mental energy on complaining about how it didn't go the way you want it to go. Just be like, well, that's how it is, and moving on. And the trail will teach you that over and over and over again until you learn.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I think being flexible and being adaptable is how I've dealt with unprepared things. And I mean, I was even telling Liz right before we got on today the internet is down in the town where I live, except like in half of the town. And so I'm at the public library right now because there was no Wi-Fi at home. And like an hour before we were supposed to get on, I was like, okay, well, this is not ideal, but there's no use in being upset about it. What do I do about it? I get into action. Okay, the library has Wi-Fi right now. Not ideal, but we'll go do that. So I think, yeah, I really would echo that point about just like not wasting time being, upset that it's not working out how you wanted it to work out. It's just like jump into action. What do I do next? It's just surrender to the circumstances that are happening. I can't control the fact the Wi-Fi is out in half the town, but I'll figure out what to do about it. And just, I think also I'll tack onto that of just like knowing and trusting that you're a resourceful person and that you will figure out a solution in almost every single thing that's happening, whether that's turn around because of a dangerous situation or terrain that you don't feel comfortable crossing or adjusting your schedule or whatever it is, you'll figure it out.
Thank you for that, Katie. Our last question right now is from Arby Bircher, or possibly Rob. What would you suggest to a person who has not much body fat to lose on a thru hike?
My suggestion would be to do some experimentation in advance to get a good handle on how much food, like go on some short trips to get a good handle on how much food that you actually require. Most people tend to overpack. Some people do underpack, but essentially figuring out through trial and error and through some of the techniques we talk about in the book, there's some online calculators that can give you sort of a starting baseline of calories that your body is probably burning in a day. And then it helps you add on the activity of hiking every day. And so figure out through that, as well as I mentioned, some trial and error of how much food you're eating and if it's enough for your body, and make sure that you're just carrying enough food. There's, lots of people who have been able to hike of all different body types. So I would say, like, don't worry about that, like letting that be a thing that holds you back from being on the trail or a fear or anything like that. Just do a little bit of experimentation and some research ahead of time to figure out what works for your body, and make sure that it does take a little bit of math and some spreadsheets, which I personally love, but figuring out, how much food you require and supplying that for yourself.
Is there anything you would like to add, Heather?
The only thing I would add to that is if you are attempting to do some training, like physical preparation before like a multi-month, like long through hike, try to operate throughout your training phase in a slight calorie surplus and emphasize strength training. You don't have to only do strength training, still do your cardio, but don't emphasize cardio, emphasize more of like strength training and that calorie surplus, because that's going to help you put on both muscle and fat tissue, and this will be beneficial fat tissue that will help you when you get onto the trail. And so don't try to, I see a lot of people that they just try to do lots of cardio. So definitely try to operate and liquid calories are a great way to get that calorie surplus, both on trail and off.
That was a great addition. Well, thank you both so much for your time and writing this wonderful resource for the hiking community. Before we sign off, do either of you have some last thoughts or words of advice for hikers looking to build resiliency on trail?
Sure. I would say if backpacking or through hiking is something that you want and you plan to do for the long term, I think it pays to invest the time to learn and practice how to take care of yourself optimally, because that's going to keep you doing what you love for the long term. So it does take a little bit of time to learn different techniques and to keep tweaking things and all of that. But I think it's absolutely time well spent, because it's what keeps your body strong and healthy and resilient. So you can keep doing this thing that you love and that brings you so much joy for years and years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. The more you can take care of your body, the better. Both for longevity and for ability to do this thing like outdoors, like hiking or whatever your sport is for that long term. Working your body through like the full range of motion, like every day. So many of us get really locked into like the sit at a desk position, and that's really not ideal for anything except sitting at a desk. So, like moving your body, eating well, stress management, whether that's through things like meditation or through like life changes, like all of this stuff can really help you on trail and off, and it can help you stay on trail longer throughout your life.
Thank you so much to both of you. Once again, this is Katie Gerber and Heather Anderson. This is their book, Adventure Ready, A Hiker's Guide to Planning, Training, and Resiliency. And be sure to pick up your copy at Tattered Cover. Thank you so much also to Tattered Cover for hosting this event.
Thank you so much to everyone that tuned in. Like Liz said, you can get your copy on tatteredcover.com. And this video will also be available to watch afterwards if there's anyone that missed out on it or you want to watch it again. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.